Welcome and thank you, everyone, if you are tuning in for this community talkback brought to you by Stages regarding the Muros Latinx Theater Festival. Our fourth annual event has pretty much concluded. All that's left is this final community talkback. Again, my name is Lupe Mendez. I am the festival coordinator. And so we hope you had the opportunity to enjoy the last 2 weeks of brilliant theater brought to you by Stages and lots of Latinx theater makers. The format for this evening is really quite simple. We will speak with the playwrights from one of the plays that was presented. And then the last two playwrights that had their plays worked on in development as a play reading. And so for this evening, you will have the opportunity to have a chat and a conversation with Candice de Meza, Lily Gonzales, and Andrew Sianez-De La O. And I will give each of their introductions, and then they'll be brought into the screen with me. If at any time you have a question for any one of the playwrights as we start our conversation, that was my child who saw Candice's face on the screen and said that was mom. And so things. No, that's not mom. Let's begin with introductions. Beginning with the author of Fatherland and star of Fatherland, Candice de Meza, is has acting work that has been featured in the American Theater Magazine, a national publication in September of 2015, NBC TV, Great Day with Deborah Duncan, the Houston Press, Houston Chronicle, Houstonia Mag, Free Press Houston, Broadway World, Black Voices with Jose Griñan, and also work that is, I believe, also featured in Acento's review. That said, ladies and gentlemen, Candice de Meza. Candice. And then next, the playwright for Transformada, Lily Gonzales, is a playwright from Texas who graduated from UT Austin with a bachelor in theater and dance and English. Their work has been developed or read at the John F. Kennedy Center, Teatro Vivo, Repertorio Español, the Workshop Theater, and After Lab First Acts. Their play, Transformada, was runner-up for the Kennedy Center Latinx, Rosa Parks, and the National Undergraduate Playwright Award, as well as the finalist for the Miranda Family Voces Latinx competition. Lily loves formal readings of films, nopales, and learning how to DJ, which I think worked out last night, ladies and gentlemen. Lily Gonzales. Yay! And then our last playwright for the evening, Andrew Sianez-De La O, is a Mexican-American writer from El Paso, Texas. He is currently a Huntington Playwright Fellow at Huntington Theater Company in Boston, Massachusetts. His work has been developed across the nation with the support of companies such as the Playwright Realm, Pipeline Theater Company, Milagro Theater, Company One, and Echo Theater Company. Additionally, he is a committee member for the WGA Audience Alliance, helping organize for a more equitable future for creators of audio drama. He is the screenwriter for the Latinx children's fiction podcast Time Storm with Cocotazo Media, and his play, The Ortiz Twins Are Coming Home, is currently being adapted for audio in partnership with Stormfire Productions and slated for a 2021 release. You can learn more about Andrew at andrewsianezdelao.com. Ladies and gentlemen, Andrew Sianez-De-La. Yay! So beautiful to have all of you here. Reminder for anybody who's in the audience, as we begin this conversation, we will be picking up some of the questions that you post. And so you can post them. I believe this is live in YouTube. And so if you post them in the comments, we can then pick them up and they'll be thrown into our StreamYard. and then we can answer those questions there. So, Candice, Andrew, Lily, thank all of you for giving of your Sunday evening to work through this. Side note, if you hear any small sounds, that is my 2-year-old in the background. Somebody help. Aside from that, we can get started. Congratulations to all of you. Phenomenal work these last 2 weeks. Thank y'all so much for all this lovely, amazing happenings. Your impressions from having taken part in Muros. What has this opportunity meant for your work as it stands, and then what do you want to see it do next? And anybody can start. I think let's go with Andrew. You start off.
Yeah, I think it's been so wonderful, for better or worse, this past year, because I've been put in touch with so many Latinx artists that otherwise I likely wouldn't have met. I'm based currently in Boston, Massachusetts, and while I am able to complete some Latinx work up here with some wonderful actors and directors, I don't necessarily feel like I have a strong community. So any opportunity I've been given to really find more people to work with has been such a blessing. A couple I can think of are Milagro Theater Company in Portland, Oregon, and now Stages here in Houston, and some wonderful work that I've been able to do back in my hometown of El Paso. So I think it's always wonderful, being in a room with Latinx talents and not only having your work centered, but also their perspective centered in the room is such a blessing. And I was fortunate enough to have an actor as well, Jonathan Contreras, who played my Tony. He is from El Paso, so we were able to really get into what it means to be an El Pasoan writer and creative. So just so excited to be able to work with people where really not only the words, but also the actors in the room, where we can really resonate on each other's shared cultures. Yeah.
Brilliant. Candice.
It was very, very beautiful for me to have Fatherland included with Teen Muros, because it's kind of a full circle moment, because your wife's piece, A City Without Altar, watching that in Teen Muros, I think that was 2 years ago now, and seeing how Dominican and Haitian perspectives were represented in this festival. I didn't know it at the time, but to have my piece now included feels like a really full circle moment, because I resonated with her piece so much. And so I feel very grateful on behalf of some lesser known Latinx identities, on behalf of Haitian people who are part of the Latinx community, to have this narrative put into this festival feels very special to have it, included in this way.
Yay! I'm ecstatically proud of the fact that the minute it was mentioned that Fatherland was going to be a part of the festival, I jumped up and was like, hell yeah, it is. So I think that's one of those bigger conversations when we talk about what the idea of Latinidad as this misconception of a monolith. I think we need to have the more in-depth conversations about how we aren't, and that all those ways that we all have a shared space and shared happenings happens across different diasporas. And so beautifully, I welcome the fact that your show was a part of the festival. So exciting. And then Lily, your take on everything.
Yeah, so man, I feel like Transformada has been read only virtually up to this point since I first wrote it. So I think, just the ability to have this virtual room where there were so many genderqueer actors and just so much love and warmth from everyone, I think was really special. And to have, Virginia in the room too, who's also born and raised in San Antonio, was just the cherry on top, because it's just like Andrew was saying, having someone to, be able to connect with on that identity, that location that you grew up in, was really important to have to kind of think about new ideas for the play and think about where this play is going to go after this. So yeah, I'm just very grateful and just like feeling very just grateful for like, the opportunity to be around people that were, coming from all different places in the United States. It's like we're all time zones, and just, able to talk about the work and just, think about new ways to think of the next iteration of the work.
So like mentioning the idea of like next iterations, I'm always curious to find out the original thumbprint of this, like how did this all come together for each of you individually? Like, where was the spark for what this would become? Was it like a wicked dream, or was it a news article that you ran across? Like, what sparked that the need to have these pieces crafted for each of you? And then whoever wants to start.
I can go ahead and jump in, and I'll try to keep this short. It was a bit of a harrowing writing process, only in that I was very fortunate when I graduated to get a remote residency with a theater company in LA, Echo Theater Company, and I spent a year being given the opportunity to work with a mentor and have the literary and artistic team over there reading my work. But I spent the first part of the program really writing a play that I thought I had to write. I had just graduated. I really felt that the only way I was going to be recognized as a playwright is if I wrote about the border. So I wrote a very 1984-esque dystopian dark, take on a future with a border wall and what that looks like. But very quickly I realized I was writing it for the wrong reasons. It wasn't what I wanted to write. It's what I thought I had to write. Around that time, I met with another wonderful playwright and director, Georgina Escobar, and we got to talking about the importance of science fiction and fantasy in the arts and how you can sort of use that as an additional lens to sort of share similar messages. So then I started writing a play set on Mars, and then I quickly realized, maybe I should do more research on science fiction before I start writing science fiction. So it became a bit of an overwhelming task. So at that point, with about a month or two left in the year-long residency, I decided I'm going to scrap it all, but I'm going to take the key parts of that Mars play that really sparked joy in me, and that was flashbacks featuring the main character growing up with their cousin in El Paso. And I realized there's something here. So the first scene I ever wrote for Borderline was a scene where they're writing horror stories and they tell the story of the Chupacabra through their own lens. So I realized that what Borderline and really what my interests were in writing were capturing those early years growing up in these border communities and how they're just slightly an octave lower or an octave higher than the worlds and communities around them, and just exploring that through horror and science fiction. So that's how Borderline came about.
That's absolutely awesome. Lily or Candice, whichever one of you wants to come in next with a response.
Yeah, I can go in next. So Transformada is actually my first full-length play. I wrote it first when I was in a playwriting class at UT, and I always wanted to write about the parties that I went to in high school and just like write about the people that I knew back then. And then at that time I was really struggling with my gender identity and figuring out like how do I talk about it? Like what do I even do I want to define it in any way? Do I want to just like be who I am and not have to put a label on it? And just like that paired with, the things that I was going through with my family, I think I just wanted to write a play that spoke to the time that I was going through, like that moment that I, really was struggling with, like, well, if I do these things that I want to do, if I, start taking testosterone, if I start, presenting a different way, will I lose this, culture that I've grown up with that I haven't appreciated up until this point? Because, it's like being in college, I finally realized like, oh, well, my family has had such a big influence on me without even knowing it. And so, yeah, it's just, I guess, kind of my trauma play, I guess, if you want to call it that. Just this like way for me to kind of figure out like, how do I come into the person that I know I am, and then, how is my family and how is the culture that I grew up with kind of interacting with that. Yeah.
And then Candice?
Fatherland happened to me. I don't know what happened. I'm still trying to figure out. In a nutshell, my father died, and the first night I came home from the hospital in Brooklyn, New York, I felt like he was sitting at a table and he was like, I want to write with you. I was not very happy about this idea also, because I was like, don't you got dead people things to do? But I don't know. So yeah, I was just writing down my feelings and my thoughts and processing the only way I knew how. And then when I came back from New York about a month later, I thought, I want to make this into a performance piece. And initially I didn't think of it like a play in the truest sense. I really felt as if there should be more places to honor grief, and I just couldn't find enough authentic representations of grief that other people could participate in and witness together. And so pre-COVID, this would have been outside at some site, pouring out water, very using a lot of spirituality from the Caribbean, Africa, a lot of voodoo, and how it transpired, and with definitely like stages coming as a hero at the end. We transformed it a bit for theater, and it lives the way that it is currently, which I'm happy about and couldn't have foreseen. So
that's awesome. I guess that's that next thing, right? Like and Candice, you kind of allude to it, because that we're living in a Pangea, in a panoramic, and a panorama, in a pantlet, in a pandemonium. You get what I'm saying? Does that permanently change the way you see this work, or are there still bits and pieces in the back of your head that are like, when this finally can be the way I think it can be, I want it to be able to do this? Like, are there still, is there a satisfaction in the way it is, or are you looking for that moment for when this can actually be in front of audiences? And then does that morph it completely, right? And anybody can answer.
I'll jump in. I really like what Andrew said earlier when he said he took the pieces that like brought him a lot of joy and merged them into this new thing. I like that. So I'm going to take that. Fatherland as it exists now, I think feels complete for me as an artist, and as like what the intention of it was. It feels complete in the way it lives. But the part that did bring me joy was, I want to still create in-person communities that can grieve together. And so I'm looking forward to a potential collaboration later this year where I can do that, and maybe just not centered through the story of myself, but a community story centered, and we still perform the rituals together. So I think like both, and it's complete in this way, but I am taking a piece of that, hopefully to have a in-person community around grief ritual.
And I love so much about bringing community into this, because I think the majority of my work really has been done virtually, whether it's readings or small private gatherings and things like that. I haven't had a fully staged production yet, but I think there is a specific, what am I trying to say? Where theater happens and where I see the possibility of staged productions of my work isn't necessarily where my family or my community is. So I think there will always be that, accessibility being a core sort of, not necessarily issue, but challenge. So I think I've always been ready and open to whatever form theater can take. I still write my stage plays with the intention of it being staged for an audience. But for instance, I did work with UTEP this past summer where we took snippets of this and turned it into a radio play that could be shared. So really, really wonderful opportunity. And I'm never going to say no to something like that because it's just a little bit easier for my community and my family to have access to that. And that's really where a lot of my work as a writer of audio dramas too, where that comes from, is that accessibility. So I will always, have that passion to want it staged and in front of people, but I'm also always open to what theater performance can look like, and especially when it comes to sharing it with my community.
That's a very good point, both of you. Really good points. Really, really good points. Lily.
Yeah, I think I'm in the same boat. Like I said before, just I've been in a workshop with people only once, and that was at this point almost 2 years ago. And I mean, this play is so much about movement, and so it's just like I yearn for that in this, and just like to be able to see all these bodies, kind of like it's like not just Sam that's like figuring out their body. It's like all these teenagers figuring out how to live in their body, and I do after this experience yearn for that that movement and that kind of messiness of trying to figure that out. But at the same time, I'm again still like grateful to bring in like communities of people that aren't just like concentrated in one place, but like come from all over. Because I think it's important to, it's like find, particularly like for the role of Sam, it's just like find that young Latina actor who is like trans or non-binary, and to give them the opportunity to fill that role and tell some version of their story on the stage. But it's also hard. I mean, I found time and time again I'm having to do the work of having to find that actor out on my own, just because sometimes those opportunities aren't accessible to those people, or like I feel like institutions don't always reach out to those communities, queer communities or trans communities, to really do that work of bringing in a room that really encapsulates what the play is about and like what community wants to focus on. So yeah, just like everything everyone said about community is like so much on my mind, where I'm thinking,
It's the urgency. Yeah.
It's like how does that come back to where the play is, and to where the heart of the work is at.
So that brings up another question. I guess the biggest question on all of our plates is, in order to build a Latinx theater making community, where do you see the net stretching out to capture the voices that we need, right? Like even in casting for each of the individual play readings, the level at which we can cast the net out and say, hey folks, there's roles, and even then, like, it's still, I think lots of different spaces have different limitations as far as getting a hold of those actors. What do you think is a needed element in getting more Latinx actors into these plays, into these spaces? What do you think is an important thing that needs to happen?
One soapbox that I love to get on is that I think our definition of theater needs to sort of be adjusted in a lot of ways. And I hope that's really one of the biggest takeaways that I really want theaters to sort of reckon with as we come back to traditional stage theater is I'm going to take a step back and say that I think the way to cast the net wider is to show how many opportunities there really are. I think if your season is a handful of plays that you do every year that may or may not have actors that reflect the local communities, you might have that turnout because they don't look at your institution as one that reflects themselves, or even any community around it. I think I won't get into any drama, but something that I'll say is that, UTEP did radio work, and some local bigger institutions here in Boston did podcasts of plays they had done in the past on stage. So I think it's sort of a chicken is the chicken before the egg conundrum of do you cast more, or do you now I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but I guess what I would say is do more work where you can sort of really reflect communities around you, and it doesn't always have to look like the big stage production. It can be a podcast series, it can be virtual work that you're doing, but I think the important thing that I would say is to make sure that you are doing it purposefully to reflect communities, and in doing so, communities will be more available to institutions to sort of pull from and start sort of organic circular growth.
Yeah, great. Yeah. Candice, Lily.
I want to piggyback. That's a funny saying. Sorry. I just think that's funny. Do you jump on it? Okay, let's not.
I mean, you could, but
it's fun. I'm pro pig though, so it's fine. I do think as we're expanding the definition of what theater is and what it means to be a theater maker, we need to expand the definition of what it means to be in community. The reason that we don't have inroads is because we're actually not in community with the people we want to invite in. We haven't developed that relationship. And if we're not going to develop those relationships, then we need a diversity of people in the room. And I don't just mean in presentation, but a diversity of who they are in community with and who they bring in the room, because then we can leverage people's communities in service of a larger vision. But if all the people we invite into the room, regardless of ethnicity or racial background, are still in the same small communities, if we're still only collaborating with theater makers who are formally trained, that limits our exposure to other communities who can be invited in. And so I think the next great frontier of theater making is using theater to build communities that will then be a generative place for new ideas, new concepts, new inroads, new connections for us in that regard. So I think, which I think might require some decentralization, some lessening of hierarchies, to have access to that network.
Yeah. Good point. Lily?
No, yeah, it's just, off that point of like formal training, I feel like, how it's like who has access to that training, and it's like who is like taking advantage of that. Like I didn't do any theater really until college, and so I just think about, who are the people that, don't even, I guess, like consider what theater is or like what live performance can be and how that can build community. But there's people doing the work out there to bring people together, and that's what theater is at the end of the day, is to bring people together and to learn something, or to just listen. And so I feel like we can, I think, take note of what other people are doing to organize and to bring communities together in a way that like theater is really, again, like, how Candice is saying, just like focusing on theater makers rather than just like on people who, maybe we don't consider to have like a creative spirit, or people who we, would overlook because we don't think about them as theater makers, but they, should be more than welcome to join the space and to consider themselves in that way.
Good points. Both you and Candice had mentioned the formal elements of theater training. And it's a question I already had like planned out to ask. What were your influences in terms of like aesthetically as you're building the universes that your characters live in. What literary or musical or performative or familiar influences live in your works currently? Like, were they? So I'll give an example. I am currently working on a play myself, but it's straight, like it's a principal running a school. And so I keep thinking of like Welcome Back, Cotter, and like different things that I saw in my youth that kind of help formate some of those things. And so like what are those influences for yourself that help kind of build what these things have become for you? Or what are you still reading, or who are you working through? What are you watching that keeps that creative element working for you?
Okay, I think I have an answer for this. So there were two texts that I relied on pretty heavily as far as generating ideas about how this could possibly look, as far as integrating spirituality elements. Was a book by Dr. Malidoma Some. Two books by him. One is Of Water and Spirit, and one is called Ritual, and it's about grief ritual and ancestor work and the like. And another book called Nandomi, an Initiate's Path into Vodou by Muros Beaubrun. So those texts were very important. Visually, I don't really know. It was only after I started like creating it that I was like, oh, people do this. Like, this is the thing. But two people helped me get outside of the limit of my brain when I would say to myself, oh, you can't do that. Like, that's not a thing people do. Lisa E. Harris, she's in Houston, and she's got this album called Earthseed with another artist. And it's sonically like bizarre in the most wonderful way. And I'm like, if someone can make this, like you can do anything. It is a stroke of genius, because I just am amazed at how expansive she is. And the work of Oakwee, Bronx Gothic, I never saw it. Someone told me I should look into it, and I just only watched the documentary, but her process and explanation of what she made and the way she uses her body really gave me free license to kind of imagine more than what I initially was or was afraid to for quite a while.
Good, thank you, Andrew.
Yeah, I'll jump in and say too that I think the work that really led up to this too, I did a lot of prose writing prior to getting into playwriting. I think that's where I felt really comfortable. So I think something that a lot of people who end up working on my plays realize are that I rant in my stage directions. Whenever I go into virtual readings or stage readings, I go in with the knowledge that I'm going to have to cut a lot of stage directions to keep things nice and smooth. But I think something that I try not to fight myself on is making myself felt in the text. I think that I include myself in a lot of the stage directions, and I include footnotes in my plays, and I include little sometimes I consider them tips. Like, I'll reference something in a play and I'll say, okay, that's what this is. Go watch it. Go see this thing. Or like in Borderline, there's a reference to homecoming mums, and I have a footnote that really stresses Google Texas homecoming mums. Get an idea of what that looks like, because that's where the heart is. All this to say that I think some work that I always think of as being very formulative is a lot of Luis Alberto Urrea's work.
Yeah.
I think one of the first books of his that I read was The Devil's Highway, and how much of that is a blending of storytelling and fact. And, there's a lot of heart in that work, and it dips between, really heart-wrenching facts and then very beautiful prose about the world that surrounds the heartbreak. So I think that's where I really draw a lot on in my work, is just making sure that you get a sense of the characters first and foremost, but everything else around the text, the things that the audience themselves might not see, but I feel I include as much about the world as I can in there, just to flesh it out for the people that are working on it. Yeah.
Cool. Lily, do you need me to redo the question? I don't even restate the question. Why my brain's not working?
Yeah, there's influences.
What were influences as you've been doing all the creating?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like initially when I started writing this, I was so uninterested in plot and so interested in having this like well-made play. I think that idea really didn't appeal to me, and so I, wanted to read plays that were more like vignettes or more in some way like fractured, because I feel like that's how I was feeling at the time. I was feeling very fractured, very my body, like, it was disembodied. It was just kind of like trying to find a way to encapsulate that feeling into a play. I remember reading Booty Candy by Robert O'Hara and really being inspired by that, and just how can I like, it's like the idea of this play has changed so much throughout the years. I feel like I had so many ambitions, and now I'm like, okay, let me like pare it down to like what it actually is. But I feel like initially it was just about like, how can I make a play that is about all of these different body parts and all of these like different things going on in like a teenager's body, that has to do with transness and has to do with how transness interacts with Latina identity. And I think, then I started writing a thesis my senior year of college about Carol and Moonlight, and just like about the things that are going on in those movies on camera, especially in Carol, where it's like there's so many different like body parts like going on in that movie, and it's like cut up so much. And I think that really inspired a lot of how I wrote the play. And it's like now, years later, it's like I'm a totally different person, totally different voice. And I think, I always look back to Jose Esteban Munoz and Cruising Utopia, where it's like, we are not yet queer. Like queerness is like this space that we're like yearning for, that we're like going to. And I think that really influences my work of like, how can I make my space feel as queer as possible, or feel not like that well-made play that I think is just like I don't know. I'm not like totally invested in that kind of work of like, oh, I want to get from A to B to C. I want to have, 2 clean acts. I want to have these wants and needs that are very clear. I think I'm more interested in things that feel messy and feel like they are happening at the time. Like this like emotional, messy kind of like, oh, I don't really know what's going on, especially like, I'm still like I'm 24 and I'm like still, going through how I want to transition, how I want to talk to my family about it. So it's like definitely a messy play for me to like keep on writing about, because it's like happening to me, and I'm like, oh, how do I write about it? Write about it with like having enough distance from it. So yeah, I always like look to theory, because I feel like that feels like a way for me to talk about what's going on emotionally.
That makes sense. That's awesome. So we do have questions from audience. And so I'm going to throw one of the questions out to y'all. And if there's any specific ones for individuals, then I will guide those questions to you. Sorry, my fingers are in your face. So question for all of you. How are your your learning curve as far as the development goes different in the virtual environment? And are there benefits to the virtual platform that you don't get from doing a show that's live, like in the round or in a black box? Yeah. And so any one of you can take that question.
I think the first thing that comes to mind for me as benefits to virtual is accessibility. Like I was saying earlier, there's sort of an outreach potential that you don't necessarily have with a staged, grounded production. But not just in terms of audience, but also in terms of actors. The fact that the actors in my reading were from across the country is also a really strong benefit, because you can sort of do that additional work Because I think ideally in a lot of ways you want your theater to reflect your community where it's being produced. But something like this, where the festival is sort of encapsulating and trying to really have conversations about the swaths of Latinx identity, I think virtual really helps dig into that in very nitty-gritty ways that you don't always get the opportunity to with stage production. So I think that comes to mind. In terms of development, I think I try to approach both the same way of just sort of constant gratitude for the opportunity you're being given, and just knowing that there's an openness in the room and just making sure everyone feels comfortable to share their thoughts. I think that's important, whether you're in person or digitally, is just making sure everyone knows their voice can and should be heard. Yeah.
Good, good.
I think a definite part of the learning curve of creating in a digital world now is learning how to adapt to various mediums. Mine, because it wasn't live, had to rely on filming, which means you have to be able to do more than just live performance. You also have to maximize camera angles to capture the best footage that you need. And so it did require even a basic level proficiency, or bringing people into the room who can have that level of proficiency for you. So I think the learning curve is definitely learning how to adapt or find the people who can help you adapt your work into a new space. Because without it, it won't be that compelling, to watch things that should be live, not live. It's
Right.
not always that compelling. So trying to figure out and adapt your script for me, or so that you can kind of maximize on the new medium or merging new mediums.
Good, good. Lily?
Yeah, I think, in this rehearsal process, in this workshop, I feel I found, still that yearning for movement, but kind of a resolution in finding the gestures and kind of that gestural language of the play that I think was super helpful for me to think about, how can that virtual gestural space translate into that live space, what can still be as evocative as what was going on. I think especially with a lot of the virtual elevated space in my play, I feel like those scenes have, messed me up year after year. I'm I don't know what to do with these. And I feel like it's subconscious. I just don't know how to handle the emotions of these scenes. But yeah, I feel like that's still really hard for me, just to find those gestures, to find that kind of, that liveness that I don't know from my own work, really, that I, seen so many plays, but it's I don't understand that with my own words yet. And so I feel like that's definitely a learning curve for me to try and, take the gestures that I would be seeing in person and try and replicate them in that little box, in that little space that we have.
Good, good. So now a question to Candice. Have you or did you ever consider Fatherland as a touring show?
I'm gonna go ahead and say yes in case this is an offer. And please slide into my DMs, because I want to achieve whatever vision you have, whoever the question asker is. But I had thought about it when I was thinking about it as a live performance piece. That was I was considering that it could live inside of theaters or buildings or black boxes, and also site specific, outside, outdoors, stripped down, a scrim projection for the film, and just one person in front, which would be me. But so yes, in its current iteration, I don't know, but I very much continue to want to expand this into live in-person community. And in any space, I mean, anywhere, touring at home with my children in the front room. Let's grieve. Let's grieve for all the things, for the Legos. And, so short answer, yes. I have considered and still am considering how to possibly do that.
That makes sense. That's good. And I'm going to actually throw that same question to Lily and Andrew. Once your shows get produced and out in the world, would you ever consider a touring show of your works?
Absolutely. Some of my fondest memories doing acting in the Boston area was in community theaters and park productions of Spanish plays. And I just love it. I love, putting up very minimal sets and just doing theater until, the lights in the park turn on and those are your stage lights. And I just love that. And, I like to think in my head that I can be a little pessimistic when I'm writing my plays because I always think like, how producible is this? But something that I always keep in mind is I want anybody be able to realize what I'm writing on the page so it can sort of take any form. So I love the idea of, traveling productions, minimal productions, high school park productions. Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Lily.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess the idea of production is still kind of this like, oh, it could happen one day, but it doesn't feel like it's happening anytime soon. And not to say like, because it shouldn't, but just, it feels still kind of like we're in this place where I think especially with my play being so many people, I'm always like, who's going to do it? Who's going to want to do it? But no, I think that'd be so cool to me because I feel like, this play to me is like, I hope for it to one day be this, it's like a high school play. It's your senior year play. It's, if it's not boyhood, but it's like, this kind of, you're going, I remember watching that movie my senior year of high school and being like, this was it. Like, this was the thing that made me like feel so excited about this like next chapter of my life. And I would love to see what like, teenagers, because it's like, I'm on the cusp of like Gen Z and millennials. So it's like, I would love to see like how those two interact and like how those things would, I guess, like how we would talk about the play with like, especially like a group of like 18-year-olds. I would love to see a group of 18-year-olds watch this play and see what they would think about it.
Yeah, that's
for sure.
That's awesome. In terms of the things that you learned with how you've reached, like Fatherland has been on screen and people can view it and see it, and you have something solid. And then also with the play readings, somewhat similarly, you've seen a staged thing. What are some discoveries that you made from the entire process? Are there things that you're like, oh, I didn't consider that before, and now here we are? So are there things that popped up that you were like, oh snap, what? Like, did that happen for you? And then how many times? And then are there some shocking things that you're like, oh, that's not going to work, I need to change that completely? Any of that? Yeah.
I will say that the director of my reading, Luis Galindo, kept finding what he felt were references or homages to Shakespearean work, and he definitely made me sound like a much smarter playwright than I am. So I will say, really enjoyed being in the process and hearing how riveting and how eye-opening my work is. But I think more so it's something that I really loved and took away from this process is just how many different ways someone can look at your work and really find something in it that's sparking something in them. I think something that I've loved, especially because all my plays are specifically written for Latinx casts. I think I've been in rooms where those were the first times those actors were able to portray a Latinx character. just a handful of times, but enough to really, cement the importance of that in me. So I think that's something that I'm constantly reminded in very wonderful, wonderful ways, is that, I wrote this with my specific lens, but everyone has approached this with their own, and just sort of finding the different ways they see themselves reflected. Because my play was very much specific to the Socorro and El Paso community and the Ciudad Juarez community, and it's so specific to such a specific region, but still seeing people outside of that community see themselves in it, and just the different shades of Latinx that you can really find in your work that you're not expecting. And it was a beautiful process, and that's just something that comes to mind. Is sometimes people make me feel smart in those rooms, and I love when that happens.
Great work. Louis also posted a note, and he said, congratulations to everyone. He had a wonderful time being part of the festival and your play. So what's up, Louis? Candice, Lily, which what is something you learned or were shocked by or discovered, or a nice surprise or not a nice surprise, or yeah.
I will say that the process of making Fatherland in rehearsal was quite difficult, because it is personal and that grief is in process. And I spent most of the time really in like a deep emotional hole of feeling like it was too specific. And I'm so embarrassed that I chose to do this, and really regretting all the choices that led me to that moment. And really thinking that because it's a story about being half Haitian, first generation, absent father, like for all those details, thinking that it wouldn't be something that would resonate with a lot of people, and that people would pity me and be like, oh, poor girl. And actually what happened, as people have watched it and they've reached out, is I'm still shocked by how resonant the story is. And not for the reasons Andrew said, is that we all are carrying so much grief all the time. And when people reach out, they just share their stories of grief with me. And I'm surprised that even in a digital space, my initial intent of building community around grief happened, which I guess proves to me then that I needed to continue doing it. And so seeing people's reactions is wholly surprising to me, because I really I hate watching stuff on the internet. I really do. I was like, I won't even watch this. Like, who's going to watch it? And then they're going to be like, oh my God, what is happening? And she's dancing on a table now. Jesus, what happened? And, but I'm so touched by so many people being willing to like cry with me or think of their own stories and share them with me. That has been amazing. I had no idea that it would do that.
Lily?
Yeah. And I definitely feel that, because I feel, as time goes on, again, it's like, why did I write this play? This character is literally me. This is like, why did I do this to myself? Now I'm like having to revise my life. But I guess it's like so interesting to think about like the new things that come up as like I, look back on this play, and just like ways that I can like distance myself from it more. Because not to say like I want to, but just like to figure out like what is the new world that I can create. And I think, Virginia like brought up this like great idea where I was like, I had never thought about making this character this way, and now I can't get out of my head. I don't want to say what it is, but I'm just like, whoa, I had never thought about it that way, because I was just like, basing, especially the family characters, Esperanza, Maria, and Luz, off of, what my own family would do. I'd be like, oh, like my aunt would never do that. But it's like, well, what if she did? Well, just like going back to those like ideas of possibility, and just like thinking
after that, yeah.
yeah, it's just like what else can exist that's like not directly in front of me, and how can that influence how the story is told? I feel like that was definitely something. I think after the third person, I was like, oh my god, like I can write a whole new play. Like I can write something that doesn't have to, necessarily be about my own experience, but can, evolve into something else.
Awesome. So one last final question, because we are nearing the end of our time together. Not in a very capitalistic way, because always producing and making should not be the way that you live your life, but in a very literal sense, what's next? Like, is it an app? Are you going to make a sandwich? Are you about to do laundry? Like, you organize your clothes for tomorrow for work? Like, what is next? Are you working on another project, or what is the next thing in store for each of you?
I'll jump in and say that I have a really, I think, wonderful werewolf Easter play that is looking for a home. So if anyone is interested in a play about transformations and toxic traditions in Latinx communities, hit me up. But outside of that, I'm writing for a lot of podcasts. So I'm doing a lot of community and support work for indie podcasts. Yeah.
Awesome. Candice.
Right after this, I think I will go terrorize my children, because that is fun for me. It brings me joy to see them,
Hustle.
run in horror.
Yes.
Keep them on their toes. Then I'll make a phone call. And as work-wise, with Catastrophic Theater, I've got 3 microplays I've written about Black liberation through the lens of science fiction and fantasy. And spoiler alert, the Black people always win, because that's important. They don't lose. They don't lose. And but we filmed this week with Nate Edwards. I love him. He directed the film portion of Fatherland. He does a lot of Toby from the SWAT. All his visuals, he does those. So I'm so excited. So this week we've got a bunch of Anna Maria Morris, a bunch of artists from Houston filming for that, and I'm excited. I'm excited for that too.
Yay! Congrats, Lily.
Yeah, so I have another play I've been working on, trying to make it a full length, about digital spaces and about micro influencer environments. But I've just, through this process and just like thinking about my family, I want to write a play for my family and write a play that they can see, because I would not share this play that I wrote with them, just because that feels very weird and kind of, I don't want to deal with it at this moment. But I want to write a play for them, and I want to write a play that they can see. And I've been thinking about Three Tall Women by Edward Albee, and just like about how that can be adapted and how I can use that structure to just like think about my family's life and think about how I can pay homage to them and kind of like give them the love that they might not have felt for me growing up, So I think that's the next project. And, I love to be emotionally taxed and just like to, kind of have to deal with the things that I didn't address whenever I lived with them. So I think that's the next thing that I want to do, a play about the women in my family. Yeah.
Beautiful. So last couple of comments before we close out for the evening. Andrew Theatrix made a comment and said, "A werewolf Easter play?" ?
It's about a family getting together to paint cascarones, the little confetti eggs.
Yeah.
And, the cousin from out of town comes back and has a lot of pent-up energy and is a werewolf now. So it's fun. It's cool. It's delving into, those people in your family that you hate, but, you sort of keep the peace because that's what your abuela would have wanted. So.
So I think you need to be in contact with Theatrix. And so we'll hook that up soon after. And then for Candice, Roxanne Schroeder Arce, who was one of the playwrights for Yanaguana's Legend of the Bluebonnet, said, my daughter, who's 15, and her were crying throughout Fatherland. She also never met her father, and he died 10 years ago. And she was not expecting to be so moved, and that your play was a profound experience. So good stuff. So we are actually right at time at 7:30. Thank you, the public, for joining us for this last final talk back for Sin Muros, a Latinx Theater Festival. Candice, Lily, Andrew, mil gracias for all your amazing work and your craft. Thank you for giving up your Sunday evening to take part in this talk back. And we hope everyone keeps an eye out for year 5 of Stage's Sin Muros, a Latinx Theater Festival. All of the bios to each of the playwrights will still be up on the website at stageshouston.com. You can I think you can find every single person on the social medias. So please make sure that you take a screenshot of your screen right now so you see all their names. And you can find out what they're doing in a few days once everybody recuperates and rests after this wonderful 2-week experience of this festival. Thank you, everyone. And you have a really, really great evening. Lily, Andrew, Candice, stay on just for a little bit. I think someone wanted to have some words with us as we finish. But for now, we can actually wave and say bye to everybody who's watching. Y'all have a great night.